Muted. So, welcome back, everyone. It looks like I was muted. You're listening to Through a Glass Darkly Radio uh, on United Public Radio. The intro music was Mark of the Doomslayer by Karl Casey at White Bat Audio. And today I have a very special guest for you, Thomas M. Ferrario, who has extensive experience at a location that was mentioned obliquely in the Kona Blue document, known as Marley Woods. And before I bring him on, I want to just kind of give you a little bit of his background. Thomas M. Ferrario has worked as a dive master, machinist, and electrical engineer on projects in the United States, Red China, and Bermuda. He has been an independent UFO researcher since 1969 to 1998, at which point Walt Andrus, founder of MUFON, asked him to become a section director for MUFON. Later, he would go on to be assistant state director for Missouri MUFON. He then co-founded the MUFON dive team with Debbie Ziegelmeyer. Ferrario then joined Ted Phillips as his assistant in 2006 and later became part of Ted's SIU team. He assisted Ted Phillips on his Marley Woods project and his Tetra Mountain Moonshaft project. Tom, welcome, my friend.
Good to be back, Sean. Good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to say. For folks who don't know what Tom's talking about, he appeared on my main channel, Through a Glass Darkly. We did 2 interviews there, but this one we're going to come back to Marley Woods and do a more extensive deep dive. And I think there's some new information that we can likely talk about, because there's hordes of information that we didn't include in the original interview, and we'll definitely cover a lot more here. So with that, Tom, tell us a little bit about Marley Woods. What is it, roughly? Where is it? Not precisely, for obvious reasons. And why is it special?
I wish I could tell everyone exactly where it is, and we're not trying to build intrigue or anything like that. We owe it to the property owners and the surrounding people, and over 213 witnesses in the area, that we promised them we would keep the location secret to protect them. And, quite frankly, the ranchers have their property and they like to carry on, try to like life as normal. And I will tell you that if you'd see behind the scenes, and our sister, I used to call it our sister site, Skinwalker. And we did work with Robert Bigelow at one time, and his people were out with us. And but I will tell you that their problem keeping that now, the security there is just as much. It's a monumental task. So, and it's just, we owed it to the property owners, and we're dealing, Marley Woods is comprised of 2 ranches, which is Site 1 and Site 2. Site 1 is actually around 700 plus acres. Site 2 is over 1,200 acres. So you can see that's quite a bit of real estate for a team of 4 to 5 people to cover at any one time when things start popping off and activities happen. But that's basically what Marley Woods is. And I will tell you that every type of activity that you see at Skinwalker, actually we dealt with in Marley Woods and then some. So it goes into a wide spectrum of just incredible incidents and cases and cryptids, and what we dealt with called the unseen force in Marley. And it goes into crop circles, agriglyphs, structured craft, classic 20, 30-foot disc, landing sites, and on tubular craft, large cylindrical, over 100-foot in length, cylindrical with rows of yellow lights. So it just, you name it, we pretty much had it in Marley.
And how long have you been associated with Marley Woods, or how long have you personally been investigating it?
I've been actually since about 2003 myself. Ted Phillips got involved in it, and that was my mentor, the great Ted Phillips. He was the physical trace research specialist and worked with Professor Alan Hynek back in the Blue Book days, and which I felt so lucky to, I attended some lectures at Ted Phillips, years ago. And I just so envied his work and the personality that I never in a million years dreamed I'd be working with him. And through Bruce Whitteman, first state director of the Mutual UFO Network, which was founded in Missouri, Bruce actually hooked me up with Ted. And that's how Ted was made aware of Marley Woods, through Bruce Whitteman. The property owner at Site 1 had so many over the years, high strangeness cases. He found in a phone book, actually, Mutual UFO Network, and called, got hold of Bruce. Bruce went out and investigated and thought it was above his capabilities. So a good friend of his was Ted Phillips, and he got Ted Phillips assigned on it. And Ted, from the very beginning, he initially wasn't too interested in it till Bruce got the property owner of Site 1 is such a wonderful man. He's a prolific writer. He takes hundreds of photos. He writes journals, the most beautiful writing you'd ever hear. And Bruce got some of the journals to Ted. And when Ted read the journals, he got out there the next day and started investigating it. And I will tell you, it became a lifelong passion. Ted virtually spent the remaining 25 years of his life devoted to Marley Woods. And we can go into some of that. And when you see what it was comprised of, you'll understand why the man devoted his remainder of his life there. But that's basically how I got into it, was with Ted Phillips. I spoke with Ted, and it was a mutual kind of I got into, I was an electrician by trade, electrical engineer at one time. And Ted asked me, he said, well, how do you think you can help me out there? And I said, well, what do you need done? And I went out there with him and ended up for the first year and a half running wires, putting security cameras and cameras on 20-foot, 30-foot windmills and rickety old windmills on buildings and in the woods. So then we got to be close friends over the years and formed a lifelong bond. And I will tell you that I wouldn't trade those years of my life for anything, working with Ted out there.
Now, when you were working on kind of building windmills and stuff like that, did you dig any holes or anything like that? Because there's a whole lore around a fear of digging at Skinwalker. Is that similar?
The interesting thing about Marley is that, like Skinwalker, when you dig and disturb the earth, that's what usually generates the activity, or the bad guy, we call them at Marley. And at Marley, it tended to be when we introduced something new or a stranger or individual that hadn't been out there before, is when we've seen an increase in activity, and usually bad activity, as they do in Skinwalker when they dig. So we dealt with that too. And I will tell you, to this day, that's part of the problem. And I'll just throw this out there in the beginning, that we did film out there with Ben Hansen and UFO Witness. We did enough for 3 shows. We aired the first show, which I urge everybody to see. It was Nordics in the Cube. And that was the first part of the show. We were on the second half. And we filmed enough material for 2 more shows they were going to air. Unfortunately, they went off the air. But what we filmed out there that night with Ben and Melissa Tittle was, it was all real. And I believe we actually caught a portal in the process of opening. But I urge everybody to catch that. You can see it, I think, on YouTube, or you can find it. But the reality of what we dealt with out there, and I will explain a little bit. We were due. I will Beyond Skinwalker, the show that it's after now, Skinwalker. That was actually slated to be Marley Woods' show for the first season. Now, after we filmed with Ben out at Marley Woods on Site 2, and the property owner loved the people out there we dealt when we filmed, and he wanted to do more out there, do more shows. And unfortunately, 6 weeks after we did the show, the property owner on site 2 had a stroke and passed away out there. So that was really, and the family at that point didn't want to do any more at that site, on site 2. I will tell you that the property owner on site 1 wanted to work with us, and we were slated to do the Beyond Skinwalker at Beyond on site 1. 6 weeks before we were due to start filming out there, the property owner called me up and said, Tom, it's all off. We're not going to do anything. Now, I have my own ideas what happened, but I do believe it was a fear factor. I do believe he didn't want anybody to get hurt. And of course, the liabilities, people on the ranch, and which was a very real, possibility. But I do believe that's what, so you can imagine 6 weeks before we're due to start shooting out there, I had to contact the people at Skinwalker. And let me tell you, they weren't happy, and I understand it completely. But I don't believe at this point that we're going to be able to proceed in the near future with anything out there. So we have to deal with the film footage we have, the photos we have, documentation, Ted Phillips' work and my own, and a few other people that were out there. Like I'll mention Jacques Vallée was out there, a good friend of Ted's. He worked with Alan Hynek, and Jacques spent time with us. And Douglas Trumbull, a special effects wizard, that did Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 2001 Space Odyssey and Brainstorm, and on and on. Douglas had made some groundbreaking camera equipment at the time and brought it out to work with us. So unfortunately, we're just going to have to go with what we got right now and make do with that. And I did just end up this last week. I was participant in filmed in my office here a Marley Woods angle. It's a documentary. It's going to be on the scientific aspect and truth about portals. And I feel privileged to be part of that. And I will let you know when and where that airs and when that's ready. But I do believe we put some imagery in that documentary that's groundbreaking. Images never been seen before, I will tell you, of portals, and actually all on Marley Woods Site 2, what we called Portal 1, of actually structured objects coming in and out of the portal, other types of anomalies, light balls, and different things coming in and out of a portal. So I look forward very much to being able to share that with the public.
Now, you have it sounds like roughly 21 years experience at Marley Woods. About how many times would you say you've been at the location? Like just roughly order of magnitude.
I would say, I would say probably maybe 35 times. And sometimes it would be for a weekend, and sometimes it'd be an extended period, like maybe 2 weeks, So we've spent a lot of time, and believe me, research there. And the technology, though, I will tell you, like they use at Skinwalker, I am really envious now because we didn't have it available. But there again, Ted Phillips, being the man he was, ahead of his time, and a professional photographer, among other things, Ted was actually trying to put cameras on remote control airplanes. And he was really, he was trying to craft together his own drones. And had we had the drone technology they have now, I suspect we would have got a lot more insight and material. And maybe not. Even drones, the technology now at Skinwalker, they have a problem with. So, but you're dealing with an intelligence there that Ted, one of the things we come away with was the intelligence we dealt with there in Marley. You're never going to get ahead of. It always calls the shots and lets you know it in some pretty hazardous ways sometimes, I will tell you. But
so at Skinwalker, there's something called the hitchhiker effect. Is there something similar at Marley Woods? Did you ever bring anything back with you?
To this day, had it not been in the last month, I would say, now Ted experienced it and spoke about it often. I always said I never had anything, but I will tell you in the last, and it's so strange because one of the things that really showed its hand, I was speaking with some people on via Skype, and I've usually got a good connection on where I am here. And I will tell you that 3 times whenever I'd speak about this and Marley and we'd get into some documentation or I'd share some things, I would lose my internet connection for a day. No reason. They check it out. There's no reason for it. And when we shot the documentary and I spoke about the portals, they had some pretty sophisticated camera equipment out here in my office, and they shot one large memory card. They put another memory card in, and it wouldn't register. They went through 5 cards that before they got another one to register, 2 of them came up not formatted, and the other, it wouldn't register at all. Brand new memory cards out of the package. And they've never had that happen before anywhere, on this equipment. And when we started getting into the portals and the intelligence, I will tell you, it was challenging to do any filming. We went through hours of work trying to get things documented. And I ended up on the end, I had some pretty sophisticated sort of trail cams that I used to take with Marley. And I actually pulled out the cards from them and formatted it and got them to them. They ended up having to use them for the remainder of the show. So it was a challenge, but I don't believe in coincidence. And I will tell you that till the last month, I didn't think I was a recipient of the hitchhiker effect, but I really believe I am now. So
what kind of effects did Ted Phillips? I mean, that seems more of a trickster, annoying, but not malevolent. What other sorts of effects did Ted Phillips experience? Was it kind of similar, or were there ever things like, so for instance, with Skinwalker, there have been some incidents where, people would see like a bipedal wolf-like creature kind of menacing outside windows and stuff like that. And they didn't even know that their father was an intelligence official and had been at Skinwalker, like literally just had no idea what they were seeing. And yet they experienced some of this hitchhiker effect. Is there, did Ted experience a malevolent side of this thing?
Yes, we did. There were several members of us and the property owners over the years that had been injured. Now and I'll get into that, but it's very interesting you bring up the Skinwalker type cryptid, because Marley had, and this is all very close to portal area number 1, which I do believe comes into play with this whole thing when you see all the facts. But we actually had the caretaker of Site 2. There was a county road between Site 1 and 2, and the caretaker one night came home late from town, and actually he pulled in the driveway and he seen what he described as a procession going down the county road of hooded figures. Now he knew this made no sense in the area, so
that sounds creepy as heck.
Well,
Tom.
It gets creepier. And it relates directly.
No, keep going. I'm going to get out of your way on this one. This is fascinating.
Skinwalker effect, like you just said. And believe me, Jacques Vallée, even at Skinwalker, had documented through the local sheriff there, the Skinwalker, the wolf type creature. But I will tell you that the property owner, he went back to his trailer on site where he lives, got his handgun, went back down the county road, and he got behind this series of hooded figures, and he starts yelling at them, and they paid him no attention. Finally, he gets as close as he dare, and he starts yelling, and the one hooded figure on the end turns around and looks at him. And I will tell you, it was a process of Ted Phillips speaking with him for probably 2 hours and myself a little bit to get him. He didn't even want to speak about what he's seen. He just said, you guys aren't going to believe me. You're going to think I'm crazy. I'm not going to. Well, in the process, we finally got his trust. And he told us that, he said, the one on the end that turned and looked at him had the face of a wolf, had a long wolf-like face protruding from the hood, and looked at him. He said he thought he seen the eyes turn red, and he did a stupid thing. He thought, but he had a small caliber handgun, a 22, and he proceeded to shoot this thing with a 22 and emptied the handgun. No effect on the object. And he said it turned back around away from him, and the group proceeded. And he said they all went into like a vapor and turned towards Site 2 on the hillside, and they were gone. Now, that is not the only time that those figures had been seen at Marley. So there again, the skinwalker relation, that gets about as strange and out there as you can get.
Oh, I have more I have more questions on that one. Like, what color were the hoods when he shot them? Were there any kinetic effects, or did it just pass right through?
He feels that it had no effect, and it was pretty dark out when he had seen these figures. He could just see that they were dark, hooded figures. Didn't describe any colors or anything like that, but just that he could make out they were hooded figures. But he remembered, and he's a pretty good shot. And he said it just had no effect on this creature, and it just went into a vapor, and they were all gone. And that has been seen in that area before there. So, that's one of and we do believe at that location, and it's not far from what Ted referred to as Portal 1. Now, in saying that, I will tell you that Ted Phillips was like me. He was a nuts and bolts man. I didn't want to go into that realm, the paranormal, anything like that. Ted liked structured craft. He could go out with a soil compactor test and figure out tonnage, structured craft lands. He could figure out the tonnage on each landing pod. Things like that. And he didn't want to get into paranormal, neither did I, but that's exactly where we ended up at Marley. And Ted, and went exactly where Alan Hynek ended up. I will let you know that he became a very religious man also, and got into the paranormal. And as Jacques Vallée says, it's all the paranormal ufology. It's all in the interdimensional realm. That's where it comes from, and it's all related. And but that, I will tell you, is where that's just some of the high strangeness we had in Marley. And believe me, we've had it all. We've had cryptids, we've had huge white, and this gets as strange again as it sounds. And a lot of what we documented out there, Ted called one-timers. They're seen 1 or 2 times, no history for it, nothing after. But what we called the as it was described by the property owner, and he's a cattleman, and he could judge cattle on the hoof within a pound. He said that he's seen this huge white polar bear / sloth type creature with a human type face that walked upright on its hind legs more than it did on all fours. And he estimated the weight to be within 400 plus pounds, 400 to 450, 475 pounds. And that gets as strange as you get. And then on one occasion, he shot it. He feels he shot it. He claims he hit it. He made he made it red, he describes. He could see the red, the blood, what he thought on the fur. And the object passed through a good 4-strand barbed wire fence. And when I say passed, he described it in passing through this fence as it dematerialized and went through the fence. He said it just floated through this fence like it wasn't there. Now, when Ted and I got there, we found 16-inch long white hair on this fence. And we did find tracks. We took casts of the tracks. Ted took the hair samples, sent it to a research person that he worked with for years in ufology, a woman named Phyllis Budinger, a very good analyst, has her own laboratory. She came back, no known match on microscopy on the hairs. There were so many people interested in this, they sent it on, for DNA work. It was pretty crude DNA work back then at the time, and it all came back no known match. So there you have physical proof, physical trace, and that verifies these things are real when they're on that side.
Where's that hair sample now?
She has some yet, and we have some that Ted took yet. We still have hair samples yet, and the analysis of it we'd like to send one day. We do have a person now in a lab that's off because, unfortunately, I wish we were independently wealthy. We're not, believe me, and it takes the downside of it takes money to do these tests, and we do believe we have somebody now that will further the cause and get a better DNA mitochondrial and better DNA work done on it. But so far, everything we got back from this there was no known match. It wasn't canine. It wasn't bovine. There's no Charolais cattle there. There's no Great Pyrenees dogs in that area. So there's not many critters out in this woods that have 16-inch long white hair.
What about human hair? Is there any?
There's that we know of. There's no human, and there again, it didn't come back as any known sample that they human or otherwise. Some that thought it was maybe Charolais cattle, which are none. It wasn't bovine, wasn't canine, so that limits the field of what it could be. And we just truly believe we got the tracks, which we showed the tracks to different biologists and actually some conservation agents in the area. And, they couldn't come up with they look like this, they look like that, but they're kind of a combination. And the unique thing about it is this critter, as Ted called it, was seen a couple times. And the interesting thing about it was viewed as the same creature from a distance, but the two times it did leave tracks, the tracks it laid down were dissimilar. So how can you explain that it had different tracks at different times? But that's what we're dealing with, the high strangeness, And we dealt with 13-inch tracks. I will tell you just briefly, the property owner of Site 1 had a pond where he watered the cattle. And one early winter day, there was a light ice with a light snow on the ice. He found 13-inch three-toed tracks going out on top of the pond and terminating in the middle of the pond. He could see that that's where they stopped in one direction. And he, not thinking, he went to step on the ice to get out there to look at them, and he broke through the ice. Well, 13-inch tracked animal, you're dealing with a good deal of mass there and probably presume more weight than a human. So how can that animal, that critter, put down that track on the ice where a human breaks the ice? It was so thin. But we did come to believe it was in the state of transition, dimensional transition, and that explains it again, why the tracks terminated, as they have added Skinwalker, I will tell you. So the high strangeness never ends.
So I put together, just based on your description, a composite of what it may have looked like. Again, I used AI and all that stuff, but you mentioned it was kind of like a sloth, kind of mixed with like a polar bear sort of view.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what
when it was on its hind legs, I would say that the interesting thing about it was it had, and again, we showed it, conservation agent. We have some actual 2 photos of it at high magnification. They're very poor images, but that's all we got. But even that, Ted shared this with different biologists and people that should know. And they said the upper torso of the creature, it made no anatomical sense. It made no sense in any type of animal they've got. And it had a long type of neck, sort of like a sloth, white. Of course, again, the property owner said it had a human-like face. When he looked at it through his rifle sight, he said it had a human, and there again, he didn't even want to speak about this to Ted at first, but he's finally, Ted got him to speak, and he said, yeah, it had a human-like face, and but it walked on vertical at times, and which there again, it made no sense. And so it's truly a unique, and now do we think there's a living, breeding population of these things out of Marley Woods? We know there's not, but when they're there, they cross the dimensional boundary, come through what we believe the portal. They're as real as you and I are. They leave physical trace. So they are actually a solid flesh and blood animal. And that's, why they're here, we have no idea. As so much in Marley, we believe some of it may just be things that pass through. And we did have a Bigfoot sighting, the only one in the county there, in the boundaries, right on the outer boundaries of Marley, the only Bigfoot in the county. So, and we do believe that some of the cryptids there have the unique ability to go interdimensional without the use of a portal. We have pretty much ruled it out. We do believe that structured craft and that sort of anomalies do have to use a portal area to come through. So, but we do believe some of the cryptids, they have that ability no matter where they are. And virtually as in Bigfoot cases, that's why I really believe if you're after these things, after a Bigfoot, and it doesn't want to be caught or photographed, you're never going to, and they're the Native Americans, call them the trickster, as you said. And they said, that if they don't want to be seen, they're not going to be seen. And so you're dealing with an intelligence, a cryptid that has the ability that's always one step ahead of you, so but that's what we dealt with, some of it.
Now, going back to Ted Phillips and talking about the hitchhiker effect, what are some of the, I guess, stranger or more malevolent experiences he may have taken home with him?
Yeah, the one thing I can directly relate to you that I was part of, and now this had happened to a certain degree with the ranchers at times, but I will tell you that Ted Phillips and myself one night, we were coming back on site 2. We the one rancher built Ted an office and a beautiful 2-story building with a big deck for his work, his observation out there on site 1. And that's where we stayed. We slept, and Ted's office was there. And that was our base camp for everybody on Ted's SIU team, which was only compromised. There were at 5 people in the team, and usually only 3 of us out there at any one time. So, but I will tell you that we were coming back from site 2, which is, as a crow flies, was probably about 2 miles away. We were on a dirt road, off a gravel road, off a county road, in the middle of 1,200 acres, gated community, gated, no way in and out of there. We locked behind us. It was locked, and no other, even the topography of the lay of the land denoted that no one else could get in there unless you came in through the gate. So we were coming back on a dirt road one night about 3 a.m, which, contrary to most people think midnight's the bewitching hour, it's 3 a.m. is the bewitching hour most of the time. And but we were coming back on site 2, going back to site 1 for the evening. And I noticed behind me, I thought it was another vehicle coming up behind me, a bright light. And I knew that shouldn't be. And about that time, this light, intense bright white light, overtook my vehicle while we were moving yet. And I remember it illuminated the inside of the building, the vehicle, with a pure white light to the degree. I mean, I remember looking in my vents in my dash, seeing the dirt in the furthermost deep part of the air vents, the fake vinyl grain, leather on the dash vinyl was just stood out. And I've never seen anything like that intensity. And I stopped the vehicle, and Ted and I both probably did a not so wise thing. I stopped the vehicle. We both jumped out, and I told Ted before I stopped, I said, "Are you seeing this, Ted?" And Ted looked at me and he said, "Well, hell yes, I'm seeing this, Tom." And so we both jumped out of the vehicle, and we looked up, and we seen this pure white light retract off the vehicle. And I know a little bit about lighting, and I don't know how you'd recreate this. And we even had the people that Beyond Skinwalker and UFO Witness, when they were out there filming, they tried to replicate this effect. They couldn't do it. They even had a drone in the air with the brightest light they could put on this drone that could lift 200 pounds. It didn't even come close to the intensity. But when the light retracted, it had a definite white, solid cut off end. You could see the bottom of the light retracting. Now, I don't know how you'd recreate that effect, but we both seen this light retract into a pinpoint, and as Ted described it, was like a reflex shutter or old type camera twisting reflex action into a pinpoint, and it was gone. Now, we seen no structured craft, nothing. We just seen the light retract, smaller, gone. Now, we got back to site one where we stayed. I stopped the vehicle. We parked for the night, and Ted got out. He was a professional cameraman at one point. Ted got out. He took care of his camera equipment meticulously, I will tell you. He got out of my vehicle, and I seen him drop his camera equipment, and I knew that was wrong. And he went over and leaned against the building, and at that point, I could see he got sick. He vomited, actually. I was concerned maybe he had a stroke or something was going on. So I got over there, and I asked Ted, I said, "Ted, are you okay?" And he said, "Well, I don't know, Tom." So I went up, got some water for him, came down with water. He stood there while he drank some water and felt a little better. He went up, went to bed that night, and I thought I was lucky at that point. That hadn't happened to me. Now, in hindsight, I wish that would have happened to me, because we were there another 3 days, and we went home. And when I got home the next morning after I was home, I felt an intense on my whole scalp. It felt like sunburn or burning. It was just, I couldn't even touch my hair. It hurt, and it got hurting so bad. I went to my local doctor, and he actually put me on opiates for the pain, and they did a shingles test. He thought maybe it was shingles. It wasn't shingles. And finally, it went away. And had that been the extent of it, I would have been happy. But then over the next, probably, I'd say 3-4 weeks, I started having vision problems. So I went later on to my local optometrist, and he said, "Well, Tommy said, you have something called macular cyst." Now, cataracts is one thing, but macular cyst is like 8 times more dangerous. They laser this out. It's like an internal cataracts that they have to laser out so you can see again. And sometimes you can have bad effects, lose vision, or you can have good effect. Fortunately, I went to the St. Louis, Missouri, and had macular cyst lasered out. And cataracts I had, as in the process of that, I had to have removed. And I asked, my optometrist, what causes this? And they said, well, and at the time I wasn't that old. And they said, well, usually something we see in age, Tom, we really don't know what causes it. So that didn't give me any answers. So I went into St. Louis, had this removed, lasered out. And it took me 3 different visits to have they put a large bubble on your eye, to protect the eye when you have this. And on the last visit, when they took this off and checked my eye, there was a young eye doctor there, and I'm so thankful. I just asked him in passing. I said, I wish I could find out, what causes this macular cyst at my age and that. And he said, well, we've never seen that in somebody, your age. But he said, the only time I've ever seen this in anybody younger or your age was we had a couple cell tower workers, and the one tower guy was on the cell tower, and he was up there working, and they fired up this thing. They forgot about him. And he actually ended up with vision problems, and the microwave energy actually created the macular cyst and cataract, because it just so happens your eyes are the most sensitive part of your body to microwave energy spectrum. So that was and the interesting thing about that was working with Ted Phillips and Jacques Vallée and others out there, and Marley and Stanton T. Freeman, the nuclear physicist. A lot of people don't remember Stan now, but a lot of them do. He was out there. He worked at times with Ted. He was a great friend of Ted. They all nailed down that microwave energy was the bad guy, the culprit that did the most harm with people. And as they are finding out at Skinwalker, I don't have to tell you, they deal with microwave energy all the time out there. So when I brought this back to Ted, it was a part of the research that and I will tell Ted he liked the scientific method. If Ted couldn't prove things 3 different ways, he didn't speak about it. So we were getting the documentation that we were all exposed to microwave energy out there, and it could be very detrimental. It could harm people. We believe it harmed animals. Some cases, I mean, it went beyond cattle mutilation, believe me. But we did come away. I came away with that, and then sharing that with the property owners later on. Some of them had experienced the same scalp issues that I had. And I asked them, what did your doctor say? We're in this small area, rural community. And they said, the doctor just said they called it touchy scalp. They had seen it before in people out there. So, but that's just some of the high strangeness that we dealt with. And yeah, it can do bad things to people,
Yeah, it sounds a lot like radiation sickness. And for folks who are just joining, you're listening to Through a Glass Darkly Radio on United Public Radio. And we're talking to Tom Ferrario right now about a place called Marley Woods. Okay, so what other instances of high strangeness did you experience while you were there, or did others experience?
Yeah, we did have, and I can speak about that too later, but we do feel we had a documented abduction, only one, but an abduction scenario there with a child. And there again, getting into the microwave, we had cattle mutilations out there, similar to what Chris O'Brien, Strange Linda Moulton House, Strange Harvest, they documented. And but we had cattle mutilations over the years out there. There were large piles of bones out there from cattle mutilations, I will tell you. They had deer mutilation we found out there. In one very graphic instance, what we call the horse barn incident, and I can go into that now if you'd like.
Please do. Just keep it PG-13. Yeah,
I'll condense it, and I warn people at this point it's kind of graphic, but that was an incident that involved the property owner at site 2. He came out of his house, walked down to this barn where he kept his favorite horse, and he'd bring this horse in the morning, usually some sugar or something, and he would check in on the horse in the barn and close the gate, the stall, and he'd run the fence line, check the fence line, was within sight of this barn the entire time, was within earshot, anything he would have heard. About 30 minutes later, he runs the fence line, comes back around, and he notices the gate ajar to the barn, which he knew he didn't do. And he goes up to the gate, and he sees the one stall doors open. And he goes in there, and he described it that it was as if he was walking into a slaughterhouse. He said, here, this perfectly healthy horse, 30 minutes ago he's seen, there's virtually, this horse looked as if it had exploded. There's pieces of horse flesh chunks on the floor, on the rafters, blood on the walls. And he described it to Ted, and Ted said, it was like it was put in a microwave oven, and it exploded. We got out there, we did sampling, we did testing, and some initial testing. Thank God we did that, because we found out there was no traces of explosives, anything like that. While we were gone, we meant to get back there sooner. We didn't get back there. This so upset the rancher because of his horse. They took and buried the larger pieces, and he burned the barn down. He couldn't stand to look at it anymore after this. So that ended up our research in that, but I don't believe we would have found anything significant after that. So there you have a very graphic case. And like Ted always said, for what purpose, what end game? Why would anything do this, but we do feel it generated great fear. And we do believe the intelligence used fear as a tool to manipulate people. And let me tell you, in that area, that part of the county, this got around, and let me tell you, it instilled fear. You can imagine. People didn't want to go out for a while at night after this happened. So, and in the previous night, there were a lot of sightings, I will tell you, on Marley. And so that comes into play too with this. So, but it happened and it's real. And I will tell you, the cattle mutilations there, it just, one time Ted was brought in on a fresh cattle mutilation. And, there again, laser precision, like cutting, on it, sexual organs taken, typical cattle mutilations type occurrence. And Ted asked the rancher on one of the first cases he did, fresh one, how often this has happened. And the rancher said, well, Ted, come with me. And he went behind another old barn there, and there was a pile of bleached white bones about 8 foot high behind the barn that Ted said, you mean all these are from cattle mutilation? The rancher said, yeah. So it's happened back a couple generations even in this family on the place. So that gets pretty strange.
You mentioned an abduction of a child.
Yeah.
What did they ever find the child? Like, what happened in that case?
Yeah, that involves, and that was a case I will tell you, just in Ted's later, I'd say 5 years of research there, he was made aware of this by a family that did not want to talk about it. And it was a family that lived on a farm adjacent to the site too. And it basically what it involves is a farm family. They had a special needs child, and they had a habit on a Sunday morning, they'd fix the child his favorite breakfast. The child came down for breakfast, and the child they couldn't keep shoes on the kid, even in the wintertime. And the special needs child came down for breakfast. They didn't quite have the pancakes was the kid's favorite meal. The kid had a habit, he'd run outside while breakfast was being prepared. He goes out the front door. They heard the door close, and there was a light snow again on the ground. They yell for the kid to come in. The breakfast was ready. They waited. The kid never showed up. They go out the front door, and in the light snow, they actually seen the child's footprints, barefoot prints in the snow.
Mm-hmm.
Go down the sidewalk, and there again, terminate, just end. No turning around, no coming back. Just the footprints just stopped, and like he was lifted up and gone. So they couldn't find the child. They called in the local sheriff's department. They did have a pond behind the house. They thought some way, somehow, maybe this child got in the pond. The sheriff's department came out. They dragged the pond. They never found anything. It went on. The family was heartbroken over this child. This was like 7 days later. The family sitting at the kitchen table. They hear the door close in the front of the house. The child comes running in and asks where his breakfast is. In this child's mind, no time has passed since he went out in the front and come back, when in the reality there'd been 7 days pass. Now, where was this child in the winter overnight? He had no hypothermia, no frostbite, no signs of wear. So
was he wearing the same clothing?
Yeah. So, did this child enter a portal that is fairly close to this? Was he abducted? Unfortunately, the child, being the nature, he couldn't explain anything or say any more than what he had. No knowledge of what happened to him or anything. In his time frame, it'd probably been maybe like 10 minutes past, when in reality it was 7 days past. So that is the only known abduction that we know of at Marley Woods. And it doesn't get any stranger than that,
At least it ended well. At least it had a happy ending.
It did. He found his way back somehow. And, it just, so, how do you explain that? It's just.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely bizarre.
Yeah.
Was there any involvement from the intelligence community in investigating Marley Woods?
There only one time that we know of, we were connected, and I will tell you that was actually in conjunction with some of the people we had out there. That was just them following up, making sure the people, the caliber people they were, that had worked with the government, that they were actually just looking into the betterment, that these people were okay and there was no problem with them. But they were virtually there just to oversee the well-being of some of the people that worked with us. But as far as being out there, Men in Black type of scenario or anything like that, we really never seen over the years any government involvement in any way. But I will tell you that I truly believe that even back when we filmed with Ben Hansen, which was the last time we really researched anything out there, was when Ben was out. I had a meter. I felt I owed it to whoever I took out there. I wanted to safeguard against microwave radiation, and I had bought a piece of equipment pretty much just geared to the microwave spectrum. And it had a visual cue, a green, yellow, the red cue, and an audible cue. And 3 times at like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning, out in the middle of nowhere, no power lines, this thing clocked off, went into green, yellow, red, and did that 3 times. The duration of it was very short, thank God. But I do believe it was the intelligence out there just letting me know it was still there, what it was capable of. And because there was no natural source of that type of radiation or artificial source in that area, except the portal area and the intelligence that is out there. And Ben Hansen had a piece of equipment that he had that it did strange things. I mean, this thing usually picked up, background radiation and natural, and all his meters, especially one in particular, he thought the batteries went dead. It went down to 0. There was no reading on anything, any spectrum, which is unnatural. And finally it came back up, was working. And that's all documented in the show. But I will tell you that it's just, it's always one step ahead of you. And no matter what you do, it will be there. And then unfortunately, like I spoke of, when we got done filming there that night, it was like close to 5 a.m. in the morning. Everybody left the last night. And I went up to the old cabin where we worked out on site 2. and everybody had their meals and water and that sort of thing. And I went up there. I wanted to make sure the property owner. I checked, made sure the lights were off, water was off, and doors were locked. Everything was buttoned up. I left. Like I said, 6 weeks later, when the family let me know that the property owner had had a stroke out there and passed away, we spoke a little bit, and I wish to this day I would have spoke with the property owner that next day, would have called him, but I didn't. And the family didn't inform me that, well, he was a little bit disappointed in you, Tom. And I said, oh, why do you say that? And they said, well, when he went out the next morning, he said he noticed on the old cabin, he thought it was very unlike you that you would leave. He said that all the doors were unlocked and the lights were on, and he said the water was running in the sink. Now, I truly believe that that was a sign to me that it was very much out there, and this was aimed at letting me know who had the upper hand no matter what. And I told him, I said, man, I wish I could have told him that, I did not leave it in that state. And they said, well, Tom, he suspected that something else had a hand in that you didn't leave it like that. He said that. And I said, well, I sure hope so, but there again, it's high strangeness. And I will tell you that Ted had experienced this in his last trips out there with a very great gentleman named Rodney Dillard, who was out there and filmed with us. And unfortunately, that episode didn't get aired. And I'm still working on getting that footage, that interview with Rodney out there, and Rodney Dillard's a professional musician. And Rodney was one of the old Andy Griffith show, if you remember that. And one couple episodes, they had a group called the Darlings out there on that show, which was a country music group. And Rodney, his family, his brothers actually played the Darlings, and they're professional musicians. But Rodney worked out in Branson, Missouri, where Ted lived. And he performed out there, and he got involved in ufology and research and went out with Ted a lot of times. And one of his last trips, Rodney was with him. And Ted was he described that one night Ted was actually approached by what Rodney said was a mist formed in the one field, and a being looked like a being, pure white light being made out of white light, actually formed out of a mist. And there again, passed through a barbed wire fence and approached Ted as if it was going to communicate with Ted. And just at the point when it got to Ted and started to try to communicate, for whatever reason, it just went out in a mist, dissipated. And that was the end of that. Now, to hear Rodney speak about this experience with Ted, and Ted sat down for quite a while after that. He didn't know what to think, he didn't know if this was a spiritual being. Is somebody coming for me? Is my time up, or what the deal was? But so we're working on getting that piece of footage back out there, and because it's the most incredible interview. To hear Rodney speak about this, it's mind blowing. And but that's just some of the high strangeness we had. I'll tell you, it's unseen force knocked steel gates down with log chains around the middle, and slammed gates down that are log chain, pulled hinge pins out of oak posts with that much force. Never scratch or dent the fence, but push them down. Trees knocked down. One case, there was a vehicle up on blocks in on the county road that adjoined Marley Woods. There was an individual that lived out there, had an old truck up on blocks he was working on. Middle of the night, something he heard hit this truck. He thought it fell off the jack stands or the blocks he had it on. By the time he almost gets outside to look, he hears this truck being pushed up a dirt driveway into a fiberglass garage door, and it broke through the fiberglass garage door. Now, Ted investigated that. Ted got out there the next day. They had 7 guys out there trying to push this truck, no wheels on it, came off blocks. They couldn't even budge this truck. So how can you justify? I mean, what kind of force did it take to push this truck on the dirt driveway, uphill, I might add, and break a fiberglass garage door? So that's just some of the high strangeness and it goes on and on, believe me. There's volumes. And that's
is there any particular time of year that this activity is more active, or
it used to be? I mean, there were times, years would happen where Ted would think it would happen more in the spring and fall. And then it would pop off. Some years it would be in the dead of winter. So there really is no comparative, calendar of events that prove any one time is more than the other over the years. It peaks and it goes down at about the time the locals think that there's not going to be any more activity. It'll fire up again, and the light ball activity, which is usually what starts this, and that gets into a science. Let me tell you, the light balls, there's white light balls, tend to be the more benign ones, and light blue ones at times. Then when it gets into the yellow and especially the red light balls, the red ones exhibit more energy and tend to be the ones that do bad things. But usually the light ball activity starts and is a precursor to other activity. Like then you start seeing the structured craft and cattle mutilations kick up and that sort of thing. So
there's like a cycle.
Yeah. It usually what starts the cycle is the light ball activity, but then we have year round. There's what they call the mystery lights, which on site 1 it tends to be in the northern sky, almost like clockwork. It varies from a couple minutes to could be a couple hours at night, but usually every night you'll see it. And it's been researched. Ted did research. It's not an aircraft. It's not a local, because of the lay of the land. There's no highways. It can't be a car. No reflections or any astronomical bodies or anything. So it's truly a mystery light that in one area. And that got into the local people, thought some of this may be due to the one property owner thought he always had the impression that there was a cave under his property, and these things, come from under the earth. Now we did find out that there were caves within 4 miles of Marley Woods. We did, and there again, Ted Phillips was a spelunker. He was a professional. He'd even been written up on exploring caves in Missouri. So he knew the geology of a cave and what to look for, what made it dangerous, what not. So we did explore a couple caves, and one in particular had a large cave complex in it. We didn't have the gear to explore it fully, but we do feel it could have extended for miles under Marley. But we had never found an opening or any entrance of a cave on Marley site 1 or site 2. So could it be, tied into the geological subterranean realm under that? It's possible, but we never did find a direct link to that. So that kind of ruled that out, But
in terms of investigators who have been there, have you ever heard of somebody, his name is Steve Mira, who does a lot of paranormal investigations?
I've heard. I don't know him personally. No. And he hadn't ever been out there, Marley. No.
Okay, I highly recommend that you have him take a look. He, like you, he has an electrical engineering background, and he does a lot of scientific work, measurements, and things like that. But and actively also people will try to mess with him and hoax him and stuff like that, and he usually sees through all that stuff.
Yeah,
so I would highly recommend, if you get a chance to take a look at him.
We do have one individual that had made a couple visits out there that was actually into that and was actually remote viewing and came up with various, some strange actually thoughts on the whole scenario, what was going on there.
Who was the remote viewer? Do you know their name?
And well, unfortunately, I wish I could tell you.
Okay, fair enough.
They choose to be left at this point anonymous, but.
Well, let me ask you another question. Were they associated with any of the military's remote viewing programs like Stargate?
No,
okay.
They weren't. No Ingalls Swan or anything like that. No.
Okay.
No, they
All right,
weren't.
sorry, continue. I was just had to ask.
No. And, so many people over the years have claimed that what we were dealing with there, especially the microwave spectrum, and we recorded, out there, it's so strange. There again, 1.6 gigahertz, and you name the spectrum. We at times it registered out there, and unlike Skinwalker, we have no close military bases or communication. At that time, there were no microwave towers, nothing out in that region. So,
where isn't I don't know exactly where it is, but Fort Leonard Wood, isn't that somewhere in Missouri? That's probably like way far away from the location.
Fort Leonard Wood is, but I would tell you that's a couple hundred miles away. So
okay, all right, just had to check. Okay,
and people always ask, did we have black helicopters overfly us or things like that? I can think of no time that we ever had any air traffic like that, military involvement overflying us ever. Now could they have been there? Yeah, they could have been, but none that we know of, or military involvement. So I really don't think, and there again, because of the nature of some of the individuals we had with us, I don't think they would have involved themselves to that degree, because quite frankly, they got everything they needed from the individuals that worked with us.
Right.
So that being said,
what did this remote viewer see? If we go back to that thread,
it gets strange. They anticipated this to be affiliated with, and this gets so strange because it goes into the other realm where Ted, the two things that captivated Ted and he devoted his whole life to, and as you know, I spoke about Moonshaft, and that gets into the whole World War II story, with Adolf Hitler and that, but I will tell you that the Nordic involvement in that's why when the remote viewer and people out there tied us into what they thought they seen was a Nordic involvement out there. This made absolutely no sense, in this area or anything we tied it to. So it's unfortunate, but when you have limited resources and that, you have to pick and choose what road you're going to go down in. And Ted chose we just couldn't focus on anything in that realm, and so we devoted our time to the physical trace case and what we could log, and walk away with physical, tangible proof. And so that we didn't, but it was some strange, and I will tell you that,
you can elaborate. I mean, you've already qualified it as a little, woo.
Yeah.
Right. But and you're just reporting. That doesn't mean that's what it really is. Like, what did they report that they saw?
There again, it gets into the interdimensional aspect of this and what's truly behind the nature behind all this. Now, some people, I will tell you in the area, the old timers, which this was something that one of the remote viewers that was out there had brought up on that, and we kind of overplayed it. We didn't put we should have been paying more attention to some of the statements made, but we found out that a lot of the older individuals that live near this area seemed to develop the sense to, when this stuff was before it took place, they seemed to have a premonition, or they could tell when this stuff was going to start.
Like exactly like Chris Bledsoe.
Yeah.
Okay, now continue. This is interesting. Yeah, keep
some
going.
of them actually looked upon this as being demonic, and they would hide themselves in their house. They wouldn't come out when this period they would start. Others would take folding chairs and go out on this area and use it for a source of entertainment and watch the light balls. What in one field it was called the twinkle lights, where a whole field would light up with like firefly type lights, white, bright white light. And all night they would view these things, coming up from the ground and floating around like fireflies. And they knew they weren't, because a lot of times this was in the winter, And so some used it as a source of entertainment. Some looked upon it as demonic. But there again, it tied into the moonshaft story. Same thing, that part of that is truly believed to be demonic, the source, the reason for this. And that's what some of the people alluded to, that this is not good. And so that being said, it was just, and we did come away with one commonality, that everybody that was out there felt that there was always a great deal of fear generated, and fear was used as a tool to manipulate people and control people out there. And believe me, it's a very useful tool. So,
do you think the unseen entity that was there was feeding on fear in some sense?
I believe it could monitor us, and at times it showed its hand, at other times, and it would even exhibit like poltergeist type activity. I will tell you that. And there again, I go into the story, when Robert Bigelow's people were out there, and they tell the story, they did the same test at Skinwalker, where, and now this is going to sound like sheer boredom to somebody that doesn't realize the significance in this, but they would take high-speed cameras of the nature that these things were so good that they would catch a bullet in flight, and you could actually use microscopy on the photographic slide image on the bullet. That's how precise and good this image was. Well, they took these high-speed cameras, and they would take on a tabletop like the one cabin at Marley, the old cabin, and at Skinwalker they did this, and they would put a deck of cards, a set of car keys in this area that was known for this activity, and they focus these cameras on the tabletop, and they come back in the morning, and this was one of the ways how they proved that this was dimensional, because these high-speed cameras in the morning, they would get the video effect, and these objects would move around the tabletop, and they would never catch these objects in motion, which the only way in our physics that can explain this is they truly felt and proved that these things were going interdimensional and reappearing in another location back, as if they were transported or went through a portal and reappeared in a location, because they were never caught in motion. They were just in different locations. So that's one of the ways of many different things. They proved that so much of this is all dimensional, and believe me, it explains so much of what we dealt with in the reality, ufology, the paranormal, and it's like Jacques Vallée always said about it. I will tell you that, and I always try to remember that he made a statement that UFO phenomena represents evidence for other dimensions that simply cannot be understood apart from their psychic and symbolic reality. What we see here is not an alien invasion. It is a spiritual system that acts on humans and uses humans. Now, that is quite a statement, I will tell you. But what that says is you're virtually at this intelligence, the mercy of this. And that's why at Skinwalker, I feel you're never going to get ahead of this. And you're in an area where bad things can happen to good people, and you have to realize that. And it's not a game, and it's not a joke, and it's very real.
So you mentioned these objects that kind of disappear and reappear, and they can't see them move. So Steve Mera, who I mentioned earlier, in poltergeist activity, that's often a common motif where you have a cup, the cup disappears, and then it reappears somewhere else. Well, he did had a it was a cup from a series of cups. So they got they had a cup that disappeared, then reappeared. So they took the reappeared cup and they did a chemical analysis of that cup at the atomic scale or close to the atomic scale on a molecular level, let's call it. And what they found is while the cups looked identical, the one that had reappeared had a completely different molecular composition when it shouldn't have. So in any of these things had they done some sort of a test like that on some of these items, and then after they reappeared, probably not, but that would be a very interesting experiment to do.
I'm not aware personally of that, but I'm quite sure that Bigelow's people, as thorough as they were, I'm quite sure they did that analysis on objects. And because some cases I know they did use duplicate objects, and I'm sure that was the purpose on that. So I'm sure they did that comparison. And but
they don't share. They don't like to share, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Their people were great people we worked with, and we formed a relationship with them, but it got to be an issue over control of material. And Ted was very independent, and so was Robert Bigelow, and I understand that completely. And it was just a relationship.
Like who wants to participate in a one-sided sharing relationship? Share everything with me. We share nothing with you.
Yeah.
Why would you ever do that? That doesn't make any sense. I can understand that.
It just gets to be, it's difficult when you have a control issue over material and research, So and Ted wanted everything out to the public. I will tell you eventually, And when you're in the middle of research and that, of course, you can't do that till you know what you're working with. And it always drove Ted and myself, quite frankly, when we go on a lecture circuit, which Ted did quite often, you had to generate money for research and funding. And but you get out there and you always have people coming up, and you always get the same line. I got an hour. Give me everything. Tell me everything you know. Everything you did, everything you know, and it just doesn't work that way, believe me. And but Ted wanted it all out there, the research, and we were working on various ways, and but I will tell you, it's just like I said, it got to be an impossibility, and like we always tried to do, and I will tell you that. You might remember the first UFO Hunter show with Bill Burns. We were on that show. We filmed enough for 3 episodes again. And I don't want to say we had anything to do with the termination of these shows. I hope not. But we aired one of our shows that we did with Ted and UFO Hunters. And they were great to work with too. But there again, the show terminated. 2 of our shows never made it to the air. So,
yeah, it seems like there's some hidden force that consistently prevents the story from, at least the documentation of the story, from getting out.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah, and we dealt with so much of that. I will tell you, over the years, just fighting for funds and trying to get it. And Ted he wanted when we were working. The main goal when we were working with the Bigelow people were Ted always wanted a round-the-clock presence in Marley, that we'd always have it manned by at least 2 people at that facility. And unfortunately, we all, none of us were independently wealthy. We all had to have a day job, and unfortunately, that takes your time away from it. And we were looking forward to that relationship with them, but it never worked out. So. But
yes, in terms of harm, so you talked about deer mutilations and cattle mutilations.
Yeah.
Have there ever been any instances of human mutilations or humans effectively killed by this phenomena?
No, there never has been in Marley, other than our own injuries and injuries due to what we felt was the microwave spectrum, microwave energy. No one was ever, individuals were ever killed or harmed to that degree. Or, like I said, missing, just the one child, and that turned out good for the better. But there has been no really issues of that. And I truly believe that people have asked me, do I feel that the property owner at site two that had a stroke on the property and passed away out there, if I felt anything injured him or in any way contributed to that, I really don't. He was a gentleman in his upper 80s and he was in relatively good health, but I think it wasn't anything. He did have a few issues, health issues, and I really don't believe that was a result of anything nefarious or, so it just is unfortunate it happened, but people have been injured out there. And of course, lucky or unluckily, it just always concerned animals, that were injured to the degree that mutilations and that sort of thing. And and some of them were, there again, for what reason? I mean, we had, in one instance, there was, I think it was like 21 deer that were found on a hilltop. And the way they were found was a unique story. A lineman was up on a pole and happened to see something in the field and went over to this field, and there were 20, I think it was like 21 deer that were down in the field. And they called the county agent out, and they determined, the veterinarian looked at them and they determined that it wasn't lightning. They couldn't really find the cause for death, that it wasn't a group poisoning, it wasn't lightning, and they never really found any good reason why these deer were dead, laying there like that. So,
were they just dead, or were they mutilated in some way?
No, they weren't mutilated. They were just found dead. They were all just laying down on the field like they fell over. And so, it makes no sense. And then again, the area where this was done, had it not been a fluke that this lineman had seen that on this hillside, they would have never been, till probably later on in the year in deer season or something like that, when people are roaming the woods and out there, But there again, like typical cattle mutilation, they did say that there weren't any predation, no predators.
Yeah, I was about to ask that. Yeah,
on these deer, nothing touched them. There were very few, if any, flies or anything like that.
So there was nothing before that may have contributed to them being on the ground, and then nothing appeared to be interested in the carcasses after, right, is what you're saying.
For whatever reason, and that should have been a field day for everything, because there is a population, a large population, I will tell you, of coyotes out there. There's even been a couple wolves sighted out there. And so, I mean, this should have been a field day for everything, but for whatever reason. What
about scavengers, like turkey vultures and stuff like that? Are there any of those in the area?
The carcasses, like you said, there's no signs of predation that anything had been eating, disturbing these animals, in the time frame that they could tell how long roughly that these things, that they've been laying there, that there should have been some actual predation on them, that predators, of some sort, but they couldn't come up with anything, very few insects even. So something was keeping them away. And so it was, and there again, like the cattle mutilation, and there's been a few times that there was in the cattle mutilation, they actually did find where they had been eaten on, coyotes and that, had bothered to, but most of the time the cattle mutilation also had been pretty much untouched, So now why even most of the cattle mutilation, they've never really come up with a good scenario why these things are left unharmed or in that pristine state. So it's another mystery. It really is. But
are people still continuing to do scientific research at this site, or is it on hold?
it's on hold pretty much right now. Like I said, that pretty much the only one that has permission is to be out there anymore, and by the rancher on site one is myself and members of the old team that have been out there before, and they strictly forbidden us, which is sad, to bring anyone with us, anybody out there. I will tell you, there's been a few instances where people thought they found it. A couple cases, people did. One of the property owner on site two's family is actually involved in the law in that area. So the sheriff's department has actually picked up people a couple times and let them know, if they come back out, they'll be prosecuted. And really, like I say, respect these people's wishes, their property. And quite frankly, if you don't know the lay of the land, you're dealing with a large part of real estate that if you don't know where the hot spots are, where this stuff takes place, you're just going to wander around and you're probably not going to see or, be in the right area. So it just makes no sense to try to get out there and see anything. You're probably not going to. So I just, respect the people's rights. And, but it is an incredible place, and we so like to get back there. And believe me, I have the people beyond Skinwalker call, they text me all the time. If as situation change, we can get out and do anything. And, I'd love to say yes. But it just, at this point, it's just locked down, and that's for the foreseeable future. I think it's going to be that way. But it's unfortunate, but I will tell you the other aspect of this is that I have a good friend, which Debbie Ziegelmeyer, which you mentioned in the beginning. We formed the MUFON dive team years ago, and she's a state director for MUFON now in Missouri and on the board of directors of MUFON. And Debbie keeps me informed. I'm no longer involved in MUFON because I just don't have the time or resources, to be honest with you. And but she keeps me informed now in Missouri that there's more and more high strangeness cases and that are approaching Marley Woods and Skinwalker in Missouri even. And believe me, when I was assisting Bruce Whitteman as assistant state director, that was not the case. There was no place that would approach the strangeness of Marley Woods or Skinwalker. And she's informing me now there's more and more places in Missouri even. I do believe the dimensional boundaries, and that all goes in, I believe, the time we're living in now, but I do believe the dimensional boundaries are weakening, and you're seeing more and more of this all over. And I think you're going to see a lot more of it. And I believe that's what's going to lead into an event that's going to come down and happen, and which I've called a false flag scenario, which was something I picked up on through my mentors. That's going to happen. And but the high strangeness is starting to increase in various places. And for what reason, I don't know. But I have an idea myself what it's going to happen. But it is more prevalent. And and it is ongoing at Marley, I will tell you. The property owner, once in a great while now, they'll contact me and they'll start telling me, like the old days, you should have been there, Tom, this and that happened and that. And I'll go into a little bit of detail, asking for detail and what's going on. And then they'll kind of start realizing, well, maybe I said too much, Tom. Maybe I shouldn't. We'll just let it go at that. And I can tell it bothers them to speak about it. But I will tell you, it's still ongoing, and the activity is just as strange as it ever was.
Speaking of high strangeness, to your back right, there's a light, and it's been strobing for I just noticed it. Is that normal?
That's normal. Yeah,
Okay. All
that's
right.
my little firelight I got in here for warmth. I put it in here just for atmosphere, you might call it. But yeah, it's supposed to do that. Now, if you see one somewhere else, that's not.
Okay. No, I had to call it out.
Yeah.
What's this? Well, going back to the one story with the hooded figures, did that person that you spoke to, did they report any sounds or smells associated with that encounter?
No, they really didn't with that encounter. But I will tell you that after that encounter, and this is a strange part, the caretaker, the property owners, site one, they do not live on the property anymore. They built a house towards the local town, and they're in their upper 80s too, I will tell you, and they live in near town now. And the caretaker still lives on the ranch in a mobile home. And I will tell you that after that event, the caretaker locks himself in his mobile home at night. Now, you might ask, what good is a caretaker if he won't come out at night to investigate anything or anything that happens? But he pretty much, during the evenings when it gets dark, he shelters in, he hunkers down in there. And I will tell you that you better call him on a cell phone, because and there's a lot of light ball activity out there yet, and things happen at night. And some nights he'll sit at a chair facing the door, and he'll have a weapon with him, and it's larger than a 22, I will tell you. But you would not want to knock on that door or create a disturbance on the other side of
It's
that
probably
door.
jumpy.
Oh yeah, yeah, he's jumpy, and so you don't. And there are people around this area. I will tell you, there again. If people get out there and start going around, you're in a very remote rural area, and you go knocking on doors or going around people's property at night, you stand a very good chance of getting shot, and that's a reality. So, it's just not worth it to do that. So, but I will tell you that near this gentleman's mobile home out there for years, we had our office up on the second floor of this, and this will date me and the project when we started, but we had VHS cameras, and lights, and on between the windmill and the building, one night there was an individual out there, a friend of the property owner, that had a brand new Cadillac, and the Cadillac was parked down by the office building where we were. And one night in particular, everybody was on the deck, and a light ball came from the north and flew between the windmill, which would have been approximately 10 to 15 foot from the building, and the windmill, and over the vehicle. And as it flew through by the building, Ted had a VHS tape player. He had VHS tapes in boxes stacked there, recorded imagery. When this thing flew through, the camera circuitry, Ted took it into a person. The camera circuitry was fried in the office building. All the tape was ejected from the one VCR, and half the tapes Ted took in to be examined were wiped clean like they'd been professionally done from the EMF. And as this light ball went between the building and the windmill, the Cadillac, the electric windows started going up and down, and the horn started blowing on this vehicle. And just a sort of close encounters type activity, But this was documented. There were several people. The property owner had friends, and the property owner used to have friends out on the deck on weekends sometimes to view some of this stuff. And but there again, this thing, light ball went between the building and the windmill and did physical damage, burned out circuitry and a camera. And we always dealt out there like they do at Skinwalker. We'd go out with one or two battery packs. Usually one would go dead. Then we'd go out with 3 or 4. Sometimes all of them would go dead. They were freshly charged. And we made sure they were charged, because one thing you didn't want to do, if you went out with Ted Phillips, you didn't want to hand him a dead battery pack that hadn't been recharged. So we made sure that was always, but there again, so often happens, battery packs would go dead. Cameras would go dead. Night vision optics sometimes would be damaged. And when we were out with Ben Hansen, he had state-of-the-art thermal imaging equipment that was where we caught what we thought was a light ball. It turned in, it could have been a start of a portal opening up in that area. And he had his ground people go after it. Even some of the film crew he had on radio go after this object, and it went in through the timber and it was gone. And there again, they had all kind of detectors out there, that night that went off. And so they documented a lot that night. And I know it was pretty upsetting, even with Ben and Melissa Tittle, when they were coming on the property that night. She had a new watch she was proud of, and it wasn't a cheap wristwatch, I will say. And she told Ben they synchronized their watches all the time, and her brand new watch, the minute she got on our property out there, had locked, it went dead. So that was her introduction to Marley Woods.
What other strange events, have happened there that you haven't discussed so far?
Well, I will tell you one of the strangest one in the latter years. This was after Ted was gone. I got a call from the one property owner on site 2, and he actually sent me some imagery, and they're very crude. But he had a woman veterinarian out working cattle, and she was out in an open field. And the afternoon came, and he went out there. He was going to bring her lunch, and he went out there, and he sees the woman veterinarian, tearing across the field in her pickup truck, and couldn't figure out what was going on. And he waited for her to come back, and she came back, and she claimed that, and this is a veterinarian that knows any type of animal or anything in the area. She claimed while she was working some cattle that she heard something like the sound of rushing wind. And she said what flew over her, and she didn't even want to speak about it again, fearing ridicule. And she finally described she's seen 2 flying, huge, like serpent creatures fly over her that gave her the impression they were like a prehistoric animal, something of that nature. But the thing that was really strange about them was she described them as looking metallic, like they were almost made out of metal. Now this makes absolutely no sense. She did have a cell phone with her. She tried taking a few images. They're very poor. You can't make out much of anything. She actually went back on her days off with a better camera, her 35 millimeter camera, with the hopes of actually getting a better imagery of these things, that they come back. Never experienced them again. And there again, as Ted said, the one-time effect, one-timers. Nobody had ever seen that in this area. She never did see it again. So how do you explain this one-time event, flying over a veterinarian, winged serpent-like creatures that look metallic, that were huge? So it's just the high strangeness goes on. And I will tell you that the property owner on site 1 is a prolific writer. He has journals of events he's kept over the years. And the property owner on site 2, the property goes back probably in his family 175 years of generations. And his wife, he married, the adjoining property, that probably goes back another 100 years. So, I mean, it's all several generations that this has happened to. And for whatever reason, we tried to go in, and there is no Native American presence there now. So we really couldn't tie into that. We're sure that they probably experienced things. The Osage Indians would have been that Native American in that area. But unfortunately, there is no more representation of that there now. But there are Indian artifacts we just found in the last 10 years there. We didn't think there were any, but we found now in a spring that's on the property, we did find a lot of Indian artifacts now on that area. So but we feel quite sure that it probably went back into the Native American history there, and that it's always been a part of that area. And geographically, you know, and Ted studied the topography, anything that would set this area out of the norm, then a farm 10 miles down the road or a mile down the road, you know, and it drove him crazy. He could never come up with anything that set this property apart from any other piece of land. So it's just always been just the same as, you know, Skinwalker Ranch, and that it's always happened there, and I suspect it always will.
And what do you think will be done to kind of break the logjam in terms of being able to send more researchers there? I mean, do you think it's something that the owners will eventually change, or like what happens when they pass on? Are they going to pass it on to their family members, or is it going to be up for sale?
Yeah. The one family, to be honest with you, the property owner actually on one of the ranches on site 2, he actually kind of always kept the family members out, the hot areas or the areas where the activity and the Porto areas. He pretty much kept his family out of those areas. Now they have homes around the outskirts of the property, but he actually kind of safeguarded them, he felt, and kept them out. And I feel like they have no interest in ever wanting to share any. They didn't even like to share this much with him, to be honest with you. They didn't like to enter that whole realm. And there again, they felt it was demonic. And I myself, over the years, I didn't think I'd be there, but I honestly, to be honest with you, I do believe that that's a part of it. I do believe a lot of it is in that realm. Now, property owner on site 1, I hope and pray they're around a long time yet, but I don't know about the family members in that family. I have hope that maybe someday that will change and we can gain access back there again, and they'll want answers and maybe want to be part of something. But you know, that's totally up to them. And they all do live under the guise, or the fear that, like Skinwalker, that when strangers show up, bad things happen. And like Skinwalker, instead of digging, it's when you introduce strangers, people, something new. And someone bringing in a large motorhome, that seemed to really go wrong. You know,
say more. This sounds like. Yeah. What happened when they tried to who tried to bring in a large motorhome, and what happened?
One of the individuals that, let's just say, they had good resources and they wanted to have a comfortable place to stay there. I mean, they had generators, you know, it was a relatively new motorhome. Generators would burn out, alternators would burn out, vehicle batteries would go dead regularly. I mean, to the point it got to beyond being a nuisance. It got to be where they had to take the thing off the ground because they felt it was just pointless to keep it there, you know. So it was it was just an exercise in futility, I will tell you. And you know, even like when we had Douglas Trumbull out there and Jacques Vallée, if you can imagine that combination, and one other individual I can't name right now, but Douglas and Jacques were there, and Douglas had a very sophisticated piece of equipment. He built camera equipment with a tracking capability. And he wasn't sure one night it was weatherproof enough. It was raining. And we put that in one of the cabins out there, an old cabin, and put it at the window. Locked. It had like a 50, 60 pound tripod, and the whole combination probably weighed, you know, close over 150, 145 pounds, and locked it down on a tripod, put it at the window. We left that night. Douglas set it up. We left. Property owner had the only key to the cabin. He locked the door, and as a precaution, he went home, and we were sleeping in the building next to the cabin. And the next morning, Douglas was excited to go down and see what the camera caught. And the property owner got there, unlocked the door, and we went in, and we heard Douglas in not so good language yelling at us that who the hell is messing with me here? And Jock went in and said, well, Douglas, I don't think anyone's messing with you. What's wrong? And Douglas said, well, look at the damn camera. And here the camera on the heavy tripod was turned 30 degrees away from the window. Now, how do you explain that, you know? But there again, it was just showing, we feel, its upper hand. The intelligence had the ability to do that and be there, physically make changes to something like that. And that's what, you know, you always were up against that type of intelligence. And, but that's, you know, Douglas and I will say I did an interview years later with Jock on Ted's passing. I interviewed Jock, and I have that story. Jock relates that whole experience better than I could ever tell, believe me. And there again, I would just urge people, you know, I have a Facebook page and I have the Marley Woods research page. You can go there and catch what's going on. And then I have a YouTube channel. You can go there and just Google my name on YouTube and you'll come up with my page. I've got like 30 some free little movies there. A lot of the light ball activity there. A lot of the different research what we did there. Ted's history, beginnings of Ted Phillips with ufology. And I had my interview with Jacques Vallée there, and he tells this whole story I just spoke of. And believe me, it doesn't get any better than in his own words speaking about this event. But you can see with light ball activity, the portal, some activity, and some of what we dealt with out there. So I just urge people to go there, and you can watch. They're all free, and watch. There's a little bit of my history there, my dive team, diving history, and Debbie Ziegelmeyer, our MUFON dive team. And I urge people, if anything really happens, breaks that we're going to be part of anything or anything we're going to do, I post it on there. I'll make a little movie there and post what's going on. So you can follow me there in Marley Woods and the Moonshaft Project, what we're involved in and what's going to happen with that.
So we have about 10 minutes left. So in the last 10 minutes, we cover, anything else that we may have missed. I just have a random question for you. Did you ever bring like a priest, like a Catholic priest, to have them bless the sites?
It's interesting you say that. We had in Missouri MUFON, we had a Reverend John Schroeder. He was kind of like the MUFON field chaplain. And he had been out there one time, and I learned so much from this man. I can't go into that at this point, a lot of the Vatican stuff and what we were part of, but I will tell you that a lot of this, I truly believe that when I say over the years, I've come to believe, like Ted did, and so many, Alan Hynek and so many others ended up where we ended up. Not intentionally, I will tell you, and like Ted, we were nuts and bolts men. I apologize to people. I come from a rural area. I started investigating UFOs probably when I was 18. And as a young guy, my family members had experiences. I had one experience. And so many people I worked with in a small community, if you get to be somebody they know won't ridicule you, you get to be the go-to guy in that area. And let me tell you, UFOs, the whole subject matter is so much more involved and frequent than people having any kind of an idea. It happens so much more frequent than people can believe, especially in rural areas. And cases that I investigate in my own area were just, a lot of the cases you could make movies about, actually. And but I do believe over the years, like Ted found, and Ted actually had an outing with Alan. Alan got there before Ted. He got to believe the paranormal, interdimensional aspect of this, the religious aspect. It's all one and the same. Ted got to be in that position at the end, and so so I've done a full turn, and that's where I am. And but I've spoke to people. I will tell you, like Reverend John Schroeder, and explain biblically how a lot of this comes down. And quite frankly, he's the only one I knew that had explanation and made sense for a lot of what we dealt with. And quite frankly, a lot of what we dealt with wasn't good. It really wasn't.
But never did you have like a priest try to bless the property or anything like that?
Not in any way like that. I mean, when he was out there, he did some prayers, and but at Skinwalker they brought in a rabbi. I don't know if you remember that episode.
Oh yeah.
And they had.
By the way, they brought them on someone else's property.
Yeah.
Like the Skinwalker Ranch doesn't own that, and they didn't ask for permission.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, that's neither here nor there. I stayed on an adjacent property, and I got an earful about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've dealt with in the early days. I dealt with the producer on Skinwalker, and we were always going to try to work out in Marley, and it always was a struggle, battle with the property owners out there. I will tell you, and they'd want to do something, and we get around to actually getting out there, and you know how that is. They want it, but then yet when you show up and it gets close, then they don't want to be part of it, and they get cold feet, and I understand why at Marley, but it was always that battle. And then, like I said, when we did Beyond Skinwalker, we were slated to do that show the first season actually, and had not the property owner on Site 2 passed away, we would have been out there and we would have done that. I know we would have done a good part of the first season was due to be our show out there. So unfortunately, that didn't take place. And like I said before, believe me, when you contact these people back 6 weeks out at coming out there with the resources that they've spent and prepared to be out there, it doesn't go over well, and I understand that. But I still deal with them, and we're under the understanding that if anything breaks, I can call them and we'll do it out there. And unfortunately, I don't foresee that happening. I am trying to work with one of a great guy, Adam Johnson, which was one of the first SIU members. Adam Johnson got involved. He studied. He was I can't remember the name of the show, but actually he went to Lindenwood College, and he became a professor there teaching filming and that. And he actually met, as a great benefit to him, he met Douglas Trumbull out in Marley, and he actually went back with Douglas Trumbull and stayed with him for about 3 months and actually worked on projects with Douglas, and it doesn't get any better than that. So he was a young man exposed to that. And when he come back from that, he got hooked up with some people, and he actually did some projects. He did several movies for the Sci-Fi Network. He was worked on, and he's got his own company now, motion picture company, and documentaries. So we're hoping to maybe get out with him and do a documentary and do something that he's one of the few that could be on the property filming, because he's part of the original team.
Now, you mentioned or alluded to what you believe is the barriers or the veil between dimensions, realities, whatever, is becoming more permeable. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, there again, I believe that gets into the religious, in the biblical aspect of this, that the times we live in, that this has been foretold that this will happen. And, I don't want to go there. I have grandchildren, believe me, but I can't help but in my office here, I'm a news junkie. I have 2 news feeds, and during the day when I'm in here working, I have 2 news feeds on, and my wife will come in if she's not working, And she'll say, how can you stand that? At least turn one of them off. And I said, no, I'm okay. And so if something draws my interest, and I'll listen to it for a while, but that is actually the way, pretty much the world we live in today. I don't, and my biggest nightmare, and I will tell you quite frankly, is I do believe, and please don't take this as being political. It's not, because from what I know, either political party, I don't believe, has the intelligence or the ability to pull off what's happening now. I believe there's forces that work behind the scene that's doing a lot of this. And I will tell you that I don't believe the border being down and the elements that have got in our country is any accident. And my biggest fear at night through people, I'm still in touch with people, some people that are still in the place to know, let's say, and some supposedly ex-military and ex-DOD, but they're not, that there's a big threat right now. And every night I worry about our grid going down, because that's my biggest nightmare, because people don't realize the government's own figure. If our grid goes down in 1 year, 2/3 of the population will be gone. And I really believe that if the grid were to go down, and that could mean something as little as some sniper teams taking out substations, 6, 7 of the right substations could take out our grid. The right type of exposure, even, a sunspot, the right intensity mass ejection could take out our
coronal
grid.
Mass ejection.
Yeah.
EMP, right.
And that happened back in the 1800s, that
The Carrington incident.
the only electronics around was a telegraph line, and telegraph lines were burned off in railroad tracks because it's a perfect receptor. If you can imagine railroad tracks being twisted around and put out of alignment, because it's a perfect antenna to pick up that type of energy. Now, that's all there was then. Now, you're talking the grid, everything electronic, everything would be gone. And unfortunately, the terrorist aspect of it is our substations, our transformers, most of that is manufactured in China now. So how's that going to go over, But
not well.
I worry about that. But that's all part of what I call the false flag scenario, and quite just encapsulate what that is. I do believe at one point, part of the dimensional boundary, I do believe what's going to come through as an alien presence to serve mankind, to help us. They're going to bring us technology. They're going to pull us out of the ringer at the right time. They're going to give us the technology, increased energy, free energy, food production enhanced, you name it, they'll have it. And the whole world will look at them as a savior. And that's exactly what they want us to look at them as. And, even von Braun predicted this. I had the fortune to meet Dr. Carol Rosen, which was von Braun's assistant, at Bruce Witteman's MUFON conference years ago. And she spoke of the false flag scenario. Von Braun predicted that it was going to be portrayed as aliens, and they weren't going to be aliens. And our betterment wasn't their motivation by any means. So I truly believe that event, that in a nutshell, is what the false flag is. And I tell people, just at that point, don't believe me, don't believe anybody. Research yourself, look into things, find out the information yourself, and don't believe everything you're told, because it's not going to be for our welfare, believe me. But I do believe that's all part of it. And I do believe, and believe me, I've lost a lot of friends in ufology that don't want to go there. But with the mentors I've had, I believe that that's what it is. And it makes the most sense to me. And then a lot of people, just briefly tell me, well, you don't believe in life on other planets if you believe it's just all interdimensional. I said, no, I absolutely believe there's life on other planets. But I'll tell you just a short story what Stan T. Freeman, the nuclear physicist, told me one time. He knew I was a Trekkie when I was young. And he said, what do you think about warp speed and all that, Tom? And I said, well, I said, we don't have the capability yet, but I believe we probably will one day. And Stanton would tell me, he said, no, I said, it ain't going to work that way, Tom. He said, we'll have to do it all through interdimensional. If you can find the interdimensional aspect way, he said, everything's possible. But he said, just to go light speed, he told me, he said, an object the size of a pea would take the combined energy output of the Earth for 100 years. Now, do you really think it's practical we're going to have a starship do that? And I wouldn't want to argue with a nuclear physicist on that. So it broke my heart at the time, though, I will tell you. But I do believe what comes across has the capability to go interdimensional, that structured craft do. And I do believe I've learned from Ted himself that later years spoke about seeing crash debris and being exposed to actual, through Hynek, working in anti-gravitational craft, 30-foot disc, that it's real and it comes across. And then people say, well, why don't we have a fleet of these things? And well, unfortunately, there's 3 elements, one in particular, that is a superconductive, without cryogenics. It's several hundred times more conductive than our best gold or conductor on its own. It weighs a lot more than lead, several times more than lead. And that the kicker of the whole thing is that element's not found on this side. So we really can't do a whole lot without that element because it's not here. And there's been attempts to recreate that through cryogenics, and they've had some success, but it's just not.
Who told you about this element?
That came through people with Ted Phillips and other individuals that shared things with me.
Is this the element 115 that Bob Lazar talks about, like a stable version of it?
No, it's similar to that, but it's not 115. And
okay.
I will tell you, though, I have over the years, I've became friends with different individuals. There's one individual, a gentleman, and I urge you to look up his name in this book. I don't know if you've ever heard of Ray Stanford.
The name sounds familiar.
And he wrote, I forget the name of it now. I can't recall his book now, but it's Saucer in the Pentagon Closet, I believe is the name of it. But he worked with NASA, and he worked in back engineering, and he was an employee with NASA for several years. And the man, I spent time at his house in Maryland, and he's a wonderful old gentleman. Of course, Ray is up now, probably in his 90s. And so, but various people I've come across, I've learned the reality of this stuff, and it's mind bending, I'll tell you. But I got to be honest, I have Bruce Whitteman to thank for all my contacts, and had not been Bruce, and we lost Bruce back 3 years ago already, and he died of cancer, and he was quite an individual. He was first state director for a mutual UFO network and Walt Andrus and John Schuessler started it. They were McDonnell Douglas employees, engineers on the Apollo space program. And they started MUFON. So many of the tracking cameras and anomalies were picked up by the Air Force. They did the first analysis, and starting the mutual UFO network was dealing with Air Force material. And then they moved on to civilian accounts. So that tells you the reality of it all. So, but Bruce worked with them in the very beginning, and he was a great gentleman. And virtually anybody in ufology, most of the big names now, I just about bet money they got their start at one of Bruce's conference in Missouri. So,
all right, Tom, any final words for the audience?
No, that's about it. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So,
all right, Tom, it was an absolute pleasure, and thank you for sharing your stories about Marley Woods. I heard a lot of new ones since our last conversation that were even more fascinating than those. So thank you again, and keep chugging, keep moving forward.
We're going to do that, and stay tuned. Like I said, catch my YouTube channel, and we're working on projects now, and I'll let you know when this documentary on portals that we just filmed out here, I was a participant in it, and spoke a little bit about Marley and what we experienced. So I'll let you know where and how that airs when that's finished, and that'll be well worth your time and effort, I will tell you.
Yeah, we should bring you back on when you're about to launch that, or shortly thereafter.
And I'll have one of the producers on there. I'll have her on with me to speak with you about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Tom. And you have a great evening. Thank you, audience, for listening in. And I'd probably rewatch this thing. There's so many good things in it. So thank you again, Tom.
Thank you.